What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Doghouse, a fan's best friend for all things sports. I'm Stevie, here with my guy Beachy. And Beachy, this is our second episode. So if you're watching this and you haven't already seen our first episode, go find us on social media, YouTube, our website, watch that first episode. But before we jump in today, Beach, I realized last time we didn't really give a background of who we are and why we're doing this. So you want to share that with everybody quick?
Yeah, for sure. So Stevie and I have known each other a long time. We went to grade school together ever since kindergarten, and then we really kicked off our friendship in next year, I guess you will, in high school. And we've been best friends ever since. We ended up going to the same college together, roommates all 4 years. So we know each other maybe a little too well,
Probably too
but
well, yeah.
we thought so. Whenever just we were brainstorming things, and we just thought like maybe it'd be fun to do a podcast, do some sport content, combine our love of sports together. And just thought we'd have we know each other so well, we thought it'd be a good dynamic to just to talk about the thing we love, and that being sports, specifically football, especially for this segment. But yeah, that's just like a little bit about us and where we're at. But yeah, so Steve, I think today we're doing the NFC, right?
That is absolutely correct. And just to kind of reiterate on what you said, we love talking sports. It's what we've been doing for forever. You might see throughout as kind of our segments grow, a couple other friends join the podcast. So we're super excited to be doing this. And if you stick along for the journey, we think that we just might be able to create something really special. But you're
Yeah.
right. We're talking about the NFC today. And so for people who didn't hear us last time, just quickly run through what are we going to be doing when talking about the NFC?
Yeah, so similar to how we do the AFC, once again, check that out if you haven't yet. But basically, we're gonna go through top five needs for each team, and then we'll go through some notable free agents, and then also just some general notes on the team, and also an interesting what if. And also, if we don't, we might not cover each of those points. We like to have this conversation naturally, but we have a blog on our website that more details what we're going to talk about. So please be sure to check that out. We have one for both the AFC and the NFC. So
Look at you, shameless plug-in, already a natural.
yeah. All right. So I think we're going to start with the NFC East today, Stevie.
Yeah, why don't we kick it off with Dallas, the Cowboys? Yeah,
Yeah, sounds good. So
cool. So go ahead, you get it started.
yeah, so when we're looking at the Cowboys, quote unquote America's team, I personally don't agree with that, but and that's how they are. The Cowboys are notorious for having a lot of hype and then ultimately not living up to those expectations. And a lot of people thought this past year was going to be their year to kind of break that mold. It wasn't. Can it be next year? Only time will tell. But looking at their biggest needs, I really pinpoint interior line, followed by running back, D line, linebacker, and then the secondary. So that top need, that interior line, it's really headlined by the losses of Tyron Smith and Tyler Badazzi. So Tyron Smith is an OT, but his heir apparent Tyler Smith, who played guard this past year, is probably going to slide out, and so to left tackle. So that leaves two interior spots gaping holes, Stevie.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about the line because something similarly that I'm wondering about is, first of all, how's that line going to affect Dak for sure? But what are they going to do at running back, right? Because I think a lot of people were expecting Tony Pollard to be Zeke Elliott essentially earlier in his career. Whether that was fair or not, we could probably talk about for a while. But coming off of injury, whether it was that or just because he was taking on a different role, Pollard was not really what we were expecting. He's a free
Yeah,
agent this year, and I think it makes for a tough decision for Jerry.
yeah, yeah. Like by no means did Pollard have a bad season. I think he still broke 1,000 scrimmage yards and he still had a productive season, but it wasn't comparatively what he did the previous season when he was kind of in a duo with Zeke. And he didn't develop into that three down back that we were kind of anticipating.
Yeah.
And it could be due to injury, kind of like you mentioned, but I'm leaning towards I think that he's probably best suited just being a very dynamic duo.
Yeah,
And I don't think you pay a guy like that top dollar, unfortunately, especially with how the league has devalued running back. So if he does come back, I think will mainly just because the Cowboys, more so than some other teams, they have their guys and they like to stick to them.
yeah,
But but the interesting thing there is that kind of got them with the whole financial pickle with Zeke because they probably overpaid him when they shouldn't have.
for sure.
Um, so I don't know. I think personally, while I love Pollard as a player, if I was Jerry Jones, I don't think I'd bring back Pollard. I think I would
Yeah.
go for a younger, cheaper option.
It'll be curious to see what Pollard is asking for and what he's expecting to get. But I agree. I mean, they really hopefully learn from that Zeke contract, like you talked about, and won't make a similar mistake. On defense, I think you listed them already, but a couple concerns, just to throw two out there that are kind of top of mind for me. Curious to see what happens with Van Esch. Not really sure if he's got another year in him. He's dealt with a lot of injury. And then also something I'm thinking about is some secondary contributors in Gilmore, Curse, Lewis. So, any reactions to
Yeah.
those areas?
I think all in all, the defense will be solid again. I mean, they were very good this year without Trayvon Diggs for most of the year, and I think they'll be solid again. They'll get Diggs back, so he'll kind of if Gilmore does leave, Diggs will kind of just slide in back to his starting role, and Deron Bland has been a revelation. So you
True
feel
that.
pretty good with those two turnover merchants headlining your secondary. But yeah, the depth is a slight concern. You are losing, like you mentioned, you're losing a starting safety, Jaron Curse, and also starting nickel potentially and Jordan Lewis. But I think all in all, the defense will actually be they're returning most of their big names, and I think the defense will be solid overall. Shouldn't see too much of a dip in production there.
Yeah, definitely interested to see, but I think I agree with you for the most part there. And to close out the Cowboys, our what if scenario here. The first part of it probably wouldn't come as too much as a surprise to people. But what we did say is, let's just say, Dak is not able to kind of recapture the magic that we saw the offense put up the first half and really throughout the entire regular season in 2023. And we know there's some turmoil there with Mike McCarthy. So by Thanksgiving, our what if says, what if he's out of the building? What's interesting in this, I think personally, is what you added on there, Region. Who do we think might end up having a shot at that head coaching interim title?
Yeah, so none other than Cowboys legend Jason Witten. So there was there was some news reported. You never know how factual it is. The news is the news. But there were some rumblings that maybe Jason Witten was being considered for the coaching job by Jerry Jones. I think he's very well liked within the organization.
Yeah,
And it kind of reminds me, you remember a couple of years ago, Steve, with the Jeff Saturday situation in Indy?
yes, very similar to that.
And it kind of like gives me those type of vibes. Like I could see like I think it would have to be kind of a catastrophic collapse, but stranger things have happened. And if Jerry just kind of wants to do a reset, kind of wants to give Jason a trial run, maybe bring him in mid-season, crazier things have happened. So
Yeah, no,
that'd
that
be
would
fun
be
though.
that. Talk about pulling in the ratings. Jason Witten, coach the Cowboys. Let's head over to the Giants in New York. Everybody's going to be thinking Saquon Barkley here for notable free agents, obviously. But what else did we see?
Yeah, so I kind of sticking on the trend, and I'll admit it's a trend I'm not a fan of the devaluing running back. Personally, I think running back is a great contributor. I mean, look, and it can transform an offense. Look no further than the reigning NFC champions and Christian McCaffrey on the Niners. But with sticking with that trend, because we can't control the NFL. I don't have RB until the number three lead need, even with losing Barkley, and then I put interior line and wide receiver above that. I really think I think they're kind of married to Daniel Jones at this point, and the best things you can do to try to set him up for success is finally get him that number one receiver, which it feels like
Yeah.
they've been trying to do the last couple years and just not doing. They have some nice young pieces, They have Jalen Hyatt, they have Wendell Robinson. They have some pieces there that I think if they had a number one guy, you could really see Jones do some damage.
Yeah, I mean, I would love for the Giants to see Daniel Jones do something magical. I think last year, maybe a little bit, we saw what could be when the Giants were rolling. This last season was definitely a disappointment, no way around that. But I guess personally, I struggle to see whether or not they're bringing in that electric offensive piece. A year where we're looking at Daniel Jones as a top. I would probably have to do more research here, but top 15 feels a little out of the
yeah,
reach.
it's tough. I mean, while it's not the great comparisons, I do look at guys like Josh Allen before Stephon Diggs or Tua before Hill. I
That's a fair point. Yeah.
to be clear, I'm not saying Daniel Jones is either one of those guys, but it just shows that a number one receiver can transform a quarterback and an offense. So you never know. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Defensively, to change the topic a little bit, I know we're looking at their front seven is pretty solid overall.
yeah,
Thibodeau looked awesome. He's definitely got that edge humming. And then I think we said a little bit in the secondary, there could be some major hits there for losing both Jackson and McKinney, but if we don't lose them and they're able to bring them back, it might not be such a tough situation.
yeah. I think was it 2 or 3 years ago where this Giants defense was actually the strength of the team, and they looked
Stout.
was anyone major, but they took a step back surprisingly. So I think the pieces are definitely there. But it's definitely interesting to see how they kind of regress without losing anyone majorly. Um, so I think we'll just have to see this season if they can bounce back to kind of how they were before. Uh, and of course, like you mentioned, they'll have to replenish the secondary. But um, you know, I'm also a believer in Brian Dable, their head coach. I really
Yeah.
liked him when he was in Buffalo. I thought he played a main reason into transforming Josh Allen. And whenever the Giants hired him, I thought it was a home run hire. And it doesn't hasn't necessarily paid dividends yet, but I just hope that they give him a relatively long leash.
Yeah, Dable is a true story of how one season can change the entire dynamic around the way people are talking about you. Because a couple years ago, we were talking about Dable as maybe the next best thing. When the Giants had that solid year, they were looking pretty decent, right? And then last year, disappointing, losing a lot. Some things start coming out of the locker room. Now we're not sure. I would agree with you, though. I think there's something to Dable. Uh, so I'll be curious to see how all that plays out. Let's wrap up the Giants here, though. What was the what if we put together?
Yeah, so this one isn't the spiciest what if, but it basically revolves around Daniel Jones' chapter coming to an end, and so they feel the need to bring in some young competition, maybe a guy like another failed quarterback prospect such as Mac Jones. So you'd have
Oh,
two
God.
Jones squared in there. Um, but but yeah, like I think this will be Daniel Jones' make or break year is the bottom
Mm. Yeah, no, I could also agree with that 100%. We've been saying it for a couple seasons now, but it does feel like this year might be the one. So, where are we headed next?
We're headed to the city of brotherly love and
Oh
Philadelphia
yeah,
Eagles.
yeah. So I know we both know a fair share of Eagles fans. I know you within the family even, but they have to have a sour taste in their mouth. I mean, there seems like there's been a team like this every season the past, I don't know, 5 years. I think I'm going back to when it was Tom Brady's last year in New England. That team looked great all season, super great record, get to the playoffs, lose to the Titans. I think it was then the Steelers when Big Ben came back from injury, looked awesome, great record, lost first round of the playoffs. And that's really what we saw with the Eagles here. Had a
Yeah, I
great
mean,
season.
the first, what was it, maybe 10 to 12 games, that range,
Yeah.
they looked phenomenal, right? They looked um like they hadn't lost a beat from last year when they made a Super Bowl appearance. and they looked to be the team to beat. And then all of a sudden they imploded in the last couple games of the season. I think honestly that can be contributed to their age. This is an older team, especially at some prominent positions such as a corner. And I think that ugly head kind of uh, reared itself. I think they just kind of lost gas in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and they if they want to, I think the Eagles could be primed for a bounce back, mainly because of the coaching changes. I think, and besides age, I think the other biggest cause for that regression was they lost both of their coordinators last season,
Yeah.
and I think the guys they replaced them with weren't up to par. I really like who they brought in. They brought in Kellen Moore,
Great hire.
who is an established play caller, has had success. And then they also brought in Vic Fangio on defense, who is one of the most experienced defensive minds in the entire league. So I like who they brought in there. So I think this team could rebound. Now, I think they'll have to add youth specifically in the secondary with Slay and Bradbury both on the wrong side of 30. And I think um, they'll also want to beef up that linebacking core. They tried the patchwork method this year. It did not work.
Yeah.
Beefing that up will be key. On offense, I think they'll be if Jason Kelsey does retire, that'll be a big loss. But they kind of were preparing for that by having some in-house options that should be able to step up, and Cam Jurgens. And then other than that, like they are losing Swift, but they still have Gainwell. Um, so I really do think that this could be. I think the Eagles could bounce back in a fierce way next year and be a contender. But I think a lot of that rests on the success of the coaching.
Yeah, I think that's a really great assessment of what we're seeing. I agree with you. Their coordinator hires, I mean, it's such a big part of the game. And sure, people are giving them some crap for kind of using the head coach as a moderator, really, like that kind of model, right? With Sirianni, he's not calling plays on either side of the ball. He just kind of there to keep everything together. If they didn't have a season like they just had, though, would we be calling them out for that? Likely not. So it'll be interesting to see if they get some better coordinators in there. How does that look? Just a couple things to add on to what you said, though. I'll be curious to see what they decide to do at running back with Swift. They moved from Sanders, had a great year, to Swift, who had a solid year in his own right. So not sure they'll bring him back depending on the price tag, but interested to see what they do there. And then, of course, what everybody's talking about is O-line. You mentioned they are kind of primed to fix it if they have to, if Kelsey retires. But that kind of brings us to our what if, which is if Kelsey does retire, first of all, that's going to just kind of thrust the Eagles offense into a new generation of talent because he really is a centerpiece, kind of the heart of that team. But specifically for the what if here, we said if he walks away, something that I could see happening is him going right to that Amazon Thursday night crew. I feel
Yeah,
like he would fit
that'd be pretty
his
awesome, wouldn't it?
personality. Yeah, I could see him fitting right in there, whether that's in the booth with Al Michaels or just kind of part of that crew. I think it would be fun to watch.
That'd be awesome. And so, yeah, that brings us to our last team in the NFC East with the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, another team here, Beach, that the biggest question mark is around the most important position. We talked a lot about that with some of the AFC teams, but what are the Commanders going to do at quarterback? They have the second pick, so
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah. Because, at one point in the season, particularly in the beginning, it looked like Howe might be the guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at one point, I think he led the league in passing yards, and he definitely showed a lot of promise. But then as the season wore out, like kind of the opposite of what you anticipate, with young guys, they get better as the season progresses. He did the opposite. He regressed. He threw a lot of interceptions. I think he led the league in interceptions. And it would be interesting because I think if the Commanders did not have the number 2 pick and maybe had like a mid-round pick or a late round first round pick, we might be talking about giving Howe another chance.
You think they
But
would? Do you think they'd be considering trading up in that circumstance, or you think that's just
yeah,
they
I mean, I
decide to
think
give
all the
it?
cards would be on the table, but I think we'd be more talking about it. I feel like all the talk is now that Howe is as good as, not gone. He'll be on the roster, but as good as backup.
Does
Um,
feel that.
with because they all signs point to them taking a quarterback at number two, like you mentioned. Um, but the this team has other needs besides that. Edge. They they they, they if you would have asked me at the beginning of last season, I would not have said Edge was concerned because they had
No.
Montez Sweat and Chase Young, and then they went and traded them both in the middle of the season. So that's outside of quarterback. That's by far their biggest need. They should also replenish, rebeef the O line.
To support that quarterback they bring
To
in, whoever it
support the
is.
quarterback, whoever it is. Exactly right, Steve. You couldn't have said truer words myself. Um, and then on going back on defense, in addition to edge, beefing up the secondary as well. They might be losing Kendall Fuller, who's not a
Mm,
splashy player, but he's consistent. He's a good, versatile player in that secondary, and Cameron Curl too, really good safety.
yeah.
Um, but no, this team is very much in a season of transition. With ownership, with coaching. Speaking of coaching, my personal opinion is I think they kind of got caught with their pants down. I,
Yeah.
I, yeah, I think they were banking on Ben Johnson from Detroit.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they were on the
and
plane to talk to him, so I would agree with you that they
yeah,
were.
and then he announced that he was staying with the Lions, and so they hired Dan Quinn. I have nothing against Dan Quinn. I think he's a good coach, but I think they wanted an offensive mind to partner with whoever their new quarterback is,
Yeah,
and they struck out in that, of course. So
yeah, they did.
it will definitely be interesting to see what the Commanders do this upcoming year. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't expect a whole lot.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, close out the Commanders here. Despite the reluctancy there, this is confidently one of my favorite what ifs that we have here.
yeah,
And
this is
we
a
talk
fun
about
one.
quarterback, we talk about what they might do, but what did you throw down here? What would kind of
Yeah,
shake
so
the tectonic plates?
yeah, so these what ifs can be as crazy as we want, and we chose to go on the all. But what if the Commanders decide they don't like any of the top quarterbacks? They don't want to run the risk of someone flaming out, so they trade out, right? They get a buttload of picks. They replenish their roster with those picks, and they opt for a homecoming of none other than Kirk Cousins.
Hey, you like that. You like that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. While unlikely, that would rock the football world, man.
That would be pretty crazy. Well, enough said on the NFC East. Let's move over to the North, and we'll start with the current team in position of not just the first overall pick. Don't think enough people are talking about this quite yet, but also the eighth pick. So tell me a little bit about the Bears here.
Yeah, the Bears have two top 10 picks. Um, and this is a team that they didn't do great this past year, but they were picking up steam as the year progressed. And I think they could be a sneaky candidate um, to to make the playoffs. I know that sounds
Interesting.
crazy, but I think this could be a team that has a good year, kind of from a last to first. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I don't know if they were last in the division or if it was the Vikings. But um, I think that if they draft Caleb Williams, who they're probably anticipating, and as also a lot of people are anticipating, um, Caleb Williams not really having too much of a freshman hurdle, or not freshman, first year hurdle. I think they could have a really good year next year because they have pieces. They have holes, but they have pieces. Now those holes do include wide receiver. They have DJ Moore, but they need whoever that young
Someone
quarterback is. They need to partner someone with them. Um, and then also edge. They're the ones that traded for Montez Sweat, but someone to
great
partner
get.
with him. And then O line, especially in the interior, protect whoever's behind them. You know. But yeah, Steven, what's your take on the Bears? I feel like I've
Yeah,
rambled a bit about them.
I think there's a ton of offensive excitement here, and there should be, especially if they do bring Caleb Williams. We've been talking about Caleb Williams coming to the NFL for the past 2 years. So this is like it's reminding me a little bit of what we talked about with Trevor Lawrence. So excited to see that come to fruition if it does. But to be honest with you, one of the big things for me on the defensive side of the ball is they got to find a way to re-sign Jalen Johnson, don't they?
Yeah. No, he's one of the few like really good corners to reach for agency when he's young. I think he's only like 25 in that ballpark. Um, and so yeah, re-signing him should be at the top of their offseason to-dos as far as free agency goes.
Agreed. So before we move to one I'm really excited to talk about, not that I was in the Bears, but to talk about the Lions, run us through the what if here on the
Yeah.
Bears.
Yeah. So this is another fun one. We got back-to-back fun ones. But King Henry coming to Chicago, Derrick Henry. I think first glance, a lot of people might uh, suspect or predict that he goes to a contender, and that would make sense, an older running back. But how many contenders have the cap space and the luxury to sign an expensive aging running back? Not that many. And as I kind of prefaced earlier, I think the Bears could have a really good season next year. And adding a guy like Derrick Henry to take some pressure off a young quarterback would do wonders for that. So what if Derrick Henry ends up in Chicago?
Yeah, I would love that if they get the right contract. But I think that could be really fun.
And then just one thing before we move on, I think we misspoke earlier. We said first and eighth picks. They actually have the first and ninth picks.
Okay, thank you. First and ninth. Good catch there.
Yeah. All right. Now, where are we headed next, Stevie?
We're going over to Detroit with the Lions, who are a brand new franchise, really, at this point. I mean, made the playoffs, won playoff games. I mean, what are the Lions? And you talked a little bit about it earlier, but just to not even consider players right now, they won the offseason already by keeping their guy Ben Johnson in-house. And as we have written word for word here in the blogs, it keeps their Super Bowl dream alive. It really does, because you lose Ben Johnson. We saw with the Eagles how important a coordinator or two can be. So I am feeling really optimistic as a Lions sympathizer and now pseudo fan, but that doesn't mean needs aren't there, even if they're slim. So what did we list out here?
Priority number one is going to be addressing corner. They tried to do it last year by bringing in Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. Unfortunately, they lost Mosley to season-ending injury, and Sutton had an up-and-down year. So I think bringing in an elite guy, and honestly, like, I could see them trying to do that in free agency. What if they tried to steal Jalen Johnson from the Bears?
That would be crazy.
Yeah. But if they can't do free agency, I think they just should definitely invest high draft pick to corner. Outside of corner, will be the second need I'm looking at is interior line. They're losing two starters there in Jonah Jackson and Graham Glasgow. Now, kind of as you mentioned earlier, Stevie, this is a team that feels primed for another deep push. They're not losing anyone too majorly. And if they have a good offseason, they nailed the draft last year, Steve. A lot of critics, a lot of chirping.
I was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I was too. I'm not denying it, but a lot of chirping, and we should have trusted that the Lions knew what they were doing, because they got great success out of the rookies in Gibbs, Laporta, and Brian Branch. So
it's one of the best rookie classes. I mean, instant starters that I can remember.
Yeah, exactly. And not to mention, like, also Jack Campbell, their other first-round pick.
Yeah, you're right.
Contributor. So I think if they knock the draft out of the park again, this team is a fun team.
They are. And, I think what really epitomizes that is our what if, because we're not even talking about bringing in some outside guy or losing somebody. We're just talking about what if somebody on this team takes the next step. Right, what could that look like? So Jameson Williams, which is a guy talking about some of their draft successes, who they had a ton of excitement for when they picked him, obviously dealt with a little suspension and injury. But what if Jameson Williams is really able to take the next step? I think we saw near the end of the season last year in the postseason run, he started to get a little more involved in the offense. He had that huge play. I forget in which playoff game it was, but it was like the end around, took it to the house. So what if Jameson Williams is able to solidify himself as a wide receiver? Let's call it 1B, wide receiver 2, solidly to St. Brown. I
Yeah,
mean, this
that
is
would
an
be a
offense
major lift
needs.
to the offense because I think they need someone else to step up because they're also losing Josh Reynolds. So
Yeah.
that'd be huge.
Awesome. Well, let's go to another team with a lot of optimism here in the the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, man. Talk about a young team that kind of took us
Whew.
for a surprise ride, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely blew away expectations. How do you think Aaron Rodgers felt about this? I don't know if there's any sound bites on there about it, but we got to pull one in if it exists.
Yeah, no, there wasn't really much reports on it that I heard. I think he was probably intentionally staying quiet about it. But yeah, that the Packers outperformed the Jets. I mean, Rodgers lost for injury, but still, and this is a young team, very young, and to be that young and to make the playoffs, it only produces optimism, right? And looking at their team, they as with every team, they have holes. But when you're as young as they are, I fully expect them to only improve next season. But yeah, so CB, what are some of their top needs that we were looking at?
Yeah, running through just at the top, I think one thing we really saw was the secondary in general, getting some additional support at corner, some support at safety. I think this is a team on both sides of the ball. To your point of them being young, this is the time where you go look for a couple key free agents, right? Bring in some experience, some guys that are known leaders that can contribute to this dynamic that they're building. I think there's a lot of promise there.
Yeah.
But cornerback and safety, they're likely going to lose or possibly resign, but Darnell Savage at safety, which is a tough loss.
Yeah.
So
I
he's
mean,
a
they're
good
actually
second.
losing both starting safeties, plus they're starting a nickel. Um, and Jared Alexander in their secondary, which is awesome. But
Yeah,
basically, depth is a big concern.
for sure. On offense, I know we have O line. They're losing potentially John Runyon at guard. AJ Dillon at running back is a free agent.
Yeah, and
Not
you
sure
know,
what they'll do with Dillon, but
yeah, yeah, and I do want to dive into the running back, but before we do that, like going back to the O line, while he's not listed as a free agent, David Bakhtiari, who's been
yeah,
a rock star for them at left tackle, his last couple seasons have been miraged by injury, carries a heavy price tag. The expectation is that he'll probably be a casualty this offseason. So, um, just something to keep in mind there as well. Although I think they had a Rasheed Walker, second year man out of Penn State. I think he played admirably in his place, so maybe he'll slide in to be a full time starter. But yeah, Steve,
interesting.
you teased running back. I would love to know like what if you were the Packers GM, how would you handle the running back situation with Aaron Jones being very expensive and
Yeah.
AJ Dillon being a free agent?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad to be clear that I'm not the Packers ownership leadership here because I do think this is a tough call. But you got a guy in Aaron Jones who showed last year that when he's healthy and he's got the blocking up front, he can still be elite, and that's very clear. And then you have AJ Dillon who has been, I think, slowly regressing. When he had the opportunity to really step up as that lead back last year when Jones was dealing with injury, we didn't necessarily see that. These are two guys that for the past, I don't know, five, maybe that's ambitious, but the last few years that we looked at as one of the best backfields in the league. That two-headed attack with Jones and Dillon. And I think one way or another, that's likely broken up this year. I think the tough decision is, though, around do you want to continue paying for this piece in Aaron Jones when you have all this young talent and you have this potential? And you could consider doing something like we talked about with the Bengals in our last segment of getting rid of some of these expensive running back pieces that, while proven, are taking up cap space and taking a look at what you have internally. That hits our what if here, right? Because Patrick Taylor, who we saw a couple sparks of late last season when he had the opportunity to step in place of Jones, do decently, right? And so maybe what they decide is they have enough there. Maybe they'll add a piece in free agency or in the draft to support the backfield, but cut ties with Aaron Jones, clear up that cap space, and move forward from there.
Yeah, yeah. It will definitely be interesting to see how that all plays out. And
Yeah.
so, but that brings us towards our last NFC North team in the Minnesota Vikings, Stevie.
Yes, it's the Vikes. And we talked about Kirk Cousins earlier. I do think as we start to look at the Vikings here, we listed quarterback as need number 5. Obviously, if they decide not to re-sign Kirk Cousins, that's going to shoot up to the top of the board. But it does feel like right now the sentiment is that Kirk Cousins is going to be a Viking one way or another next season.
Yeah, I agree. I think it just it makes the most sense for him to return. I think he likes being Minnesota. I think O'Connell likes him. Um, but even if he does return, quarterback is still in need, in my opinion, for two main reasons. One being his age. He is turning 36, but two, being that he might not be ready for the start of the season. So, are they content with who they have in house? I think the only one signed currently is Jaron Hall, the rookie they drafted last year. Are they content with him starting the season potentially? I, I don't know. But then again, I don't know if necessarily a rookie would make sense to start the season either, which kind of leads you to think maybe they try to bring in a veteran backup. And I guess I'm looking at, I guess they do have Nick Mullins still on the roster, but I don't think he really inspired a lot of confidence either. Um, so what if they bring in a guy like James Winston or Sam Darnold or
Yeah.
someone who at this point is a career backup? Um, but so he won challenge Cousins, but basically keep the house afloat until Cousins can come back.
Yeah, and well, not to say literally the same thing for every team, but that what you just said makes it even more evident that no matter what their signal caller looks like, they're going to need to continue to shore up that offensive line. Particularly, we listed here the interior offensive line. You need protection, no matter who it is. If they're going to be successful, they need
Yeah,
that.
an offensive line has been a pain in their side, I think, for a couple years. They do have a stalwart, left tackle in Christian Darrisaw, but yeah, they're losing Don Rinzer on the interior, and that also contributes to their running game, which they're returning Madison, but he didn't live up to expectations. So I
No.
kind of anticipate maybe them trying to add a young piece there, while that's in the draft. Um, but yeah, how about on defense, Stevie? Where are we looking to see their needs on defense?
Yeah, no, this is a team that needs edge, not just because everybody needs edge, but because they genuinely have a hole potentially in the roster there. If they lose Hunter and Davenport on their edge, that is a number one draft priority. I mean, we've talked a lot about, they'll probably continue to be the talk with the 11th pick. They'll choose a signal caller or try and trade up, maybe. But if they don't, you got to think edge is the choice there to bolster that defense.
Yeah, yeah. I'm in full agreement with you. I think that front seven is their major hole where on defense. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to close this out here, the what if to play into some of the possibilities at quarterback, we say the Vikings roll the dice here. We're not necessarily saying they trade up in this scenario, but with that 11th pick, they take Michael Penix out of Washington, a guy who I like a lot. I think has a lot of potential in the NFL if he can stay healthy. Keeps him in the color purple, and we'll see.
Yeah, the Vikings will definitely be an interesting team to watch as they have some big decisions. And we didn't even really touch on it, but Justin Jefferson, it seems like their GM pretty much all but squashed the
Yeah,
rumors that he
shut
might be
down that
traded.
possibility.
Um, but no, this is definitely an interesting team to watch in the offseason.
For sure. Cool. Well, let's head to the South, and we'll start out in Atlanta. What do you think about those Falcons?
Man, there seem to be a lot of teams that need a quarterback. Like
Yeah,
more
we're hitting a
more
lot.
than more than average, it seems like. And the I'm sorry, the Falcons are another one. And I think the Desmond Ritter experiment has run its course. I think that he'll be
Yeah.
I think he can find a career as a good backup, but I don't think it's as a starter. And so I do think the Falcons are going to try to target a new quarterback this offseason, whether that's in the draft or in free agency. Now, drafting eighth overall, um, that's pretty high, and they
Yeah.
will be able to probably draft a quarterback with that, whether McCarthy, Nix, you mentioned Penix, although that kind of seems a bit high for those guys. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
it's way too low for the top three in Williams, May, and Daniels. So they're kind of at an awkward in between, right? Like, do they trade up, which would have to be significant draft capital. And not to dive into our what if too soon, but it lends in hand. Our what if is if they um, find their way into the top three by trading one of their young offensive pieces in
Yeah.
Robinson, London, or Pitts. But I don't even know. Like they would have to give up um, big draft capital in addition to those guys. So I don't know. It will be interesting to see how what their priorities are and what they want to do. Um, but if they do stick at 8 and they don't take a quarterback, I think that has to be either wide receiver or edge. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Well, and even if they don't deal London, if that was the route they took for the draft, they need somebody opposite him. I mean,
Oh,
not. I mean,
yeah.
certainly Van Jefferson, Scotty Miller heading to free agency, whatever. But like, they need somebody in the building that can line up alongside London and take some pressure away.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I think the previous regime, Arthur Smith, he more leaned on the running game and also double tight end sets. But I would assume that the new regime will probably not lean on that. So they're going to have to invest in the wide receiver room because literally all they have is on the roster right now Drake London and then a guy I don't recognize his name personally, but Josh Ali. So um, they need to add some juice there to help whatever quarterback they bring in. But
Yeah.
I mean, this team this team is not without talent. Though, Stevie. They like
No.
we kind of alluded to earlier. They have London, they have Pitts, they have Robinson, who I think all three have their best football ahead of them.
Yeah, I agree
And
with you.
on defense too, they have some nice pieces. They have AJ Terrell, they have Grady Jarrett, right? Um, and they're really only losing two starters in Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell. Now Calais Campbell is the ageless wonder.
Yeah.
But as far as defense goes, their biggest thing they need to do, and they've been seemingly trying to do it for the better part of half a decade or more, is get someone who can hunt a quarterback, Stevie.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, they need to bring us in because I know one of the positions we both feel most confident about heading into the draft is the edge prospects. And Atlanta, if one of you are listening, bring us in. Doghouse Sports will solve that edge puzzle that you're right. They just cannot seem to find a solution to.
Yeah. And I it befuddles me because most of the time with a marquee position like that, um, you find a way to get it done. And maybe not immediately, but like I said, they've been trying to do it forever. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, so moving on from the Falcons, let's move over to the Panthers. And we talked about the Falcons having some firepower. How about a team that has little to no firepower at all, unfortunately, in the Carolina Panthers?
Yeah, the Panthers are an interesting team to me because 2 years ago they didn't have a great season, but they also didn't have a bad season, and they had a roster that showed a lot of promise to me. Like I was actually fairly high on the Panthers prior to last season, relatively, but like I thought they had some good pieces. Um, but then they traded up to get their guy in Bryce Young, and so far that hasn't paid out. He wasn't even the best rookie quarterback, maybe not even the second best. Stroud was clearly the best, and then the argument can be made for second best, whether that be Richardson, who had a very uh, sparse playing time with his injury, but Young just needs to take another step, and I think finding him targets. Adam Thielen performed admirably, better than most people
Hey, let's
anticipated.
not shit on Adam Thielen on this podcast. I will not stand for it.
I'm not. I'm not. He played well above expectations, but I think he'll be 34 this year. So they need to bring in some other weapons. Um, and I also think like shoring up the offensive line so that Bryce Young was terrorized last year. We got to fix that. Um,
Yeah.
but not to harp too much on their offense. On defense, they have a lot of free agents. Just to rattle some off for you, they're losing Deshaun Williams on the defensive line, Brian Burns and
And Burns.
Gross Matos at edge, Frankie Lavu, who he's not a household name, but he's a really good linebacker that more people need to know about. So this team needs to replenish themselves on defense because with a young, that's the other thing that might not be talked about is, we always talk about supporting a young quarterback with offensive line and receivers. But another thing that helps a young quarterback is a strong defense.
That's
Because
yeah.
it takes pressure off of them from having to put up 30 plus points every game. So priority number one, who do they got to bring back, Stevie?
They got to bring back Burns. They got to get him back in the building.
Exactly. They need to bring back Brian Burns. If they can't find a way to do that, then their outlook gets even more
Yeah.
dismal. But yeah, no, the Panthers. Unfortunately I don't see the Panthers making too much noise next season. I think their future is semi bright, but not all rests on Bryce Young.
Yeah, and
So
I'm not ready to sell my Bryce Young stock quite yet. I think talking through our what if here, recent reports might contradict this, but they got Canales in the building as their head coach, right? He's got that connection in Tampa thanks to last season. What if they're able to circumnavigate some of this? We didn't talk about this, but they don't have a first round
yeah,
pick, so they're not going to be able to add that talent on offense at the top of the draft. But what if they find a way to get Mike Evans in the building? That gives Bryce Young his target right away. We earlier in this pod listed some of those quarterbacks who took the next step with that crazy talent. Maybe that's exactly what he needs to take the next
yeah,
step.
that'd be crazy if they got Mike Evans in the building. Even though like on paper, kind of seems like if you're a young team, why bring in an over 30 receiver? But the reason for that is to develop your quarterback,
Right.
as you just mentioned. So, but yeah, like good call out on. We forgot to mention how they don't have a first round pick, which is big. So they'll have to figure
Yeah.
out how to navigate around that as well.
All right, let's go to the Bayou. We got the Saints here. Let's start this one off. I'm just gonna rattle off some needs because I think we'll see a theme here on where those needs live. But top needs that we saw: offensive tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, linebacker, running back. Tell
Yeah.
me those aren't all the key pieces that you need to a successful offense right there.
Yeah, and the Saints, you're exactly right, Steven. The Saints are a bit of another interesting team when I was diving in them because when you look at this roster, well, first of all, they are hurting salary cap. They are
Yeah.
absolutely hurting.
Oh,
And that's because they have a lot of good aging players. But usually when you have good aging players, that means you had a good season the year before, right? And then when you
right.
look at this roster and also the division they were competing in, all signs point to they should have ran that division and had a successful year.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
They did not.
And so now they're faced with some difficult decisions. And so some of those needs we listed were projective in nature. We listed running back and linebacker as top needs, where if they're able to hold on to Alvin Kamara and Demario Davis, those aren't needs. But Alvin Kamara is an aging running back who's still very good, but has lost a step, carries a huge cap price tag,
Huge. Yeah.
and Demario Davis, who it's crazy when we're talking about a guy like Demario Davis because he's one of the best linebackers in the league, but he is going to be 35, and he also carries a huge price tag for another position that's kind of been devalued.
Yeah, off the ball linebackers. You're right. It's
Yeah.
it's similar situation to running backs.
So if they would lose those two guys, suddenly they have gaping holes there. And another need that we listed it that is not apparent right now necessarily, but it's quarterback because they brought in Derek Carr last offseason,
Ugh.
thought he would be the guy. He was okay. I've actually been a career long supporter of Derek Carr. I always thought that he's always been the guy that was never had the team around him, but this year he kind of did. So I don't know. It will be definitely interesting to see how they decide with Derek Carr, and that does lead us into our what if, Stevie. Um,
Yeah. And it's what if they decide they do have, thanks to those injuries, if there's one positive thing to come out of it, they have a little bit of flexibility here with his contract. Maybe they decide to trade Derek Carr, who, like we said, solid, but he hasn't been able to get over the hump and clear up some of that cap space. I think the one thing to note with this what if, though, is you got to think if they make that decision, they're also kind of submitting to a full rebuild of the team at that point.
Yeah, indeed. And we didn't even mention their what we listed as their top need, mainly because it's actually the only one of their only needs that we listed that is not projective in nature, but is offensive tackle because Trevor Penning, who they drafted, I think 2 years ago in the first round, has not panned out yet. So they need to address offensive tackle as well.
Cool. Well, let's close out the South. Talk about the Buccaneers here. Go ahead, tell us what you saw high level looking at their team and their needs.
Yeah, the Buccaneers, they I think they rebounded fairly admirably after losing Tom Brady, I think a lot of people anticipated a steep drop off, but I think they had a pretty similar record and really Baker Mayfield put up similar numbers. And I think Baker Mayfield had the year he needed. He signed a 1 year prove it deal, and I think he proved it. I think he proved that whether it's the Buccaneers or another team, he will be a starter
Yeah.
next season. Um, Now, if he does return back to Tampa, it could be a much harder job if they lose out on Mike Evans, which they weren't able to reach an extension last year. Kind of looks unlikely this year. Um, but that would be a big loss.
Yeah, that it would. And I think that a lot of Baker Mayfield's continued success wherever he goes is going to be on his ability to take a step back. He doesn't have to take a prove it deal, but can he play into his salary, his contract a little bit to allow whatever team he goes to get him the right support to be successful?
Yeah, I think Baker's a good quarterback, but I mean, as with all quarterbacks, he relies heavily on weapons. Um, so it'll be interesting to see. But outside of that conversation, their biggest needs actually reside on the defensive side of the
Yeah,
ball.
read these three defensive free agents.
Yeah,
We got,
we got
go ahead.
Antoine Winfield, we
Yeah.
got and then Levant the duo of Levante David and Devin White. Um,
Ugh.
and so Levante David and Antoine Winfield, especially huge contributors, stars, defense transformers. So losing if they would lose both those guys, that would be very painful. Um, and so they would need to recoup at those positions accordingly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And well, so that's our what if is, though. What if that's the choice they make, right? So desperate to keep these offensive pieces together and Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans, they feel like that's the right direction for the future. They choose to instead let these defensive stars, who, like you said, are not just key players, they're transformers of your defense. They let them walk. Very different Bucks team heading into 2024.
yeah, and like just before we move on from the Bucks, um, their coaching situation is interesting because I feel like Todd Bowles has done just enough to kind of keep his name out of the hot seat.
He's getting
But
that C plus.
yeah, but like I also don't necessarily um I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a transformative coach. And I feel like he's kind of still riding on the curtails of Bruce Arians a bit. So
Mm,
it will be interesting to see perform well this year. I could see them moving on.
yeah, I agree. I kind of almost forget that he is their head coach, just because you're right. He flies under the radar. But to move us to the NFC West, here's a team that we're going to start with who you could argue flew a little above the radar because everyone's going into the season saying the Cardinals are going to be the worst team in the league, win very few games, didn't have Kyler Murray. That's not what I saw out there. I don't know about you, but I saw a team who, first of all, wanted to play, but second of all, had some pieces and were able to do it.
Yeah, they didn't have a great season by any means, but they showed a little more uh fight in their dog than maybe anticipated. And getting back Kyler Murray fully healthy is definitely going to be a lift. I've never been the biggest Kyler Murray fan. Always thought he's been a little overrated. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do this year. And to allow him to be on his to perform at his best, they need to get him a wide receiver help. With Marquise Brown being a free agent now, They do hold the fourth overall pick. That puts them in an interesting spot because if the dice or the if it rolls out how we're anticipating, they'll have the first non-quarterback pick. And who do we think they're going to take, Steve?
I don't know who it could be. I mean, it couldn't be Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, that like that does seem like you can never call a draft lock because as we know, crazy stuff happens. But if he's there and they don't take him, that would probably be criminal.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I think you're right. I think probably he ends up a Cardinal.
yeah, and I think him and Kyler Murray do have the makings of a very elite combination that could, Murray's still on the young side, so that could be a very deadly duo for years to come if that does happen.
Yeah, yeah, the offenses will be exciting to watch. I think it'll be nice to hopefully see Murray play a full season. But really where the needs of this team fall are on that defensive side of the ball. And it's not necessarily because they're losing any big name free agents. It's just because they need to bolster the defense. I mean, outside of Buda Baker, I challenge somebody listening to this, name another defensive player on the Cardinals.
Yeah, it's tough, and they do have like some guys. Like I don't want to belittle them too much, because they do have like Kazir White, who's very admirable player, and they um and Garrett Williams played well as a rookie. But you're right, Stevie. They need to add more firepower to this defense, basically in every single level, whether that's front seven or secondary. Um, and that starts with the premier defensive position, pass rush, right?
Yeah, that
They don't
is.
really have the guy right now, so they need to add that. And then even though they do have Buddha in the secondary, adding help there, especially at corner, they're they're losing their incumbent starter, potentially Antonio Hamilton. And they just need some consistency, solid play. They haven't had since Patrick Peterson left a couple years ago.
Yeah, you're very right. So to close out the cards here, nothing too crazy in this what if, just kind of some general optimism around this team, though, is what if we do see Kyler Murray finish that full season, play at an elite level, and give the Cards a chance to run the 2025 postseason table?
Yeah, I mean that'd be fun, right? It'd be fun. Like I'm always for new blood in the playoffs and making a run. So it'd be fun to see the Cardinals going on tear.
For sure. Where are we headed next?
Speaking of a team that I'm kind of actually tired of and wouldn't mind actually seeing you take a step back, we move to San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, because you've been calling the downfall of the 49ers taking a step back for a few, what, 3 seasons now? And they just
Dude,
keep bouncing back up.
yeah, I've struck out like um for whatever reason I've thought that the 49ers, not last season, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I thought that they weren't a great team. I think that really stemmed because of some of the uncertainty that they faced before Brock Purdy at the quarterback position. Um, but it's a very well coached team, Kyle Shanahan, and well coached teams always do well. And not only do they have that, but then they've also been able to stock up on some firepower at important positions to get them over the hump. And like Nick Bosa, absolute star at edge, and then on offense they have the dynamic trio in Samuel, Kittle, and McCaffrey. However, a guy that's not talked about as much, but I think is arguably a better like true receiver than Samuel. That might be a hot take, but
No,
is
put it
is
out there.
Brandon Ayuk, right? And there's
Yeah.
kind of been some reports that he might be unhappy. Um, so it will definitely be interesting because, like, this on paper, this offense really isn't losing anyone big. They only have losing one starter, John Feliciano, on the line. But this team, this offense should be very dynamic and one of the best in the league next year, assuming they return everyone. Wouldn't you agree, Stevie?
No, I would completely agree with you. I think one thing I'm thinking about, not necessarily for this next season, but if they want to continue this success, Trent Williams, who is a generational tackle, is turning 36 this year. So just starting to think through what's that succession plan at tackle. But past that, I think you're right. I mean, we had to put this on our write up because there was so little they needed. They might just need a new backup quarterback.
Yeah, offensively, that is. On defense, they do have needs. They aren't necessarily losing many starters. Their only free agent starters are Chase Young and Tashawn Gibson. Um, and Young never really lived up to the expectations after that trade. He was solid, but not um, super dynamic. But depth. When I look at their depth, they're losing a lot of depth in the front seven. Let me just rattle off a couple names for you. Randy Gregory, Javon Kinlaw, Demetrius Flanagan Fowles. These guys aren't necessarily get a lot of spotlight, but when you are as good as team as the 49ers, you rely on your depth. And they've had good depth in recent years. And they're losing a lot of it. Well, potentially losing a lot of it. And
Yeah.
especially at linebacker, losing that depth plays a huge role when you consider in kind of weird fashion, they lost Dre Greenlaw in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, super weird. I mean, I don't know if I can remember an injury, especially that caliber, that happened so strangely at the biggest point of any game. But yeah, tore that Achilles, and that's not just something you walk back on the field from the next season.
And suffered in the Super Bowl. Like odds are he won't be ready to start the season. So even though they are great at linebacker with Fred Warner, adding someone there should probably be up there in priority for them. But all in all, I do expect the 49ers to be another top contender next year. I think that they will be able to address their holes and be a good team next year.
Agreed. Yeah, and to wrap them up, you can tell we love Kirk Cousins because we're going to talk about him just one more time here. But what if the Niners decide that maybe the Purdy critics have something going? They don't think he can get them over the hump in the Super Bowl, and they decide they want to try a Kirk Cousins reunion in a different way, reuniting him and Kyle Shanahan there in
Yeah,
San
that
Francisco.
would be crazy, right? And it is interesting because like I'm not a Purdy hater. I think Purdy is a very good starting quarterback. However, he kind of gives you younger vibes of Jimmy Garoppolo, like
He does,
he's better than Jimmy Garoppolo, don't get
and
me
he's
wrong.
cheaper.
But they, when they took the swing and ultimately missed on Trey Lance a few years ago, their whole idea behind that was they thought that they needed a dynamic quarterback to get them over the hump, a true game changer. And I don't know if Purdy is classified as a true game changer. So maybe they feel like getting a guy like Kirk Cousins is a true game changer. And with Cousins like kind of recovering, you could still start Purdy
That's
to
true.
begin the
That's
year,
true.
and probably not miss a step at all. And then when the later in the season and the playoffs are around, you do trot out your game changer in Kirk Cousins. So it's unlikely. Like I said, I think that Cousins will probably return to the Vikings, but I mean that'd be crazy. I mean, if he does go to the 49ers, I think they do automatically pretty much become the favorites.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And if you're Kirk Cousins, I mean, why not, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
mean, if you're Kirk Cousins and your priority at this part of your career is to get a Super Bowl,
yeah,
if that is his priority, then I think the 49ers do make the most sense.
agreed. Cool. So we'll head up to Seattle now, and I think this is a team that's in a kind of weird spot, right? Because undeniably they do have some talent on the roster, especially like offense. They got pieces at receiver, but like they're also 1 year removed from making the playoffs, which was exciting. But then they had this last season, which was just kind of a flop. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but because it wasn't horrible, they also don't have the draft capital to make any big moves.
Yeah, they're kind of in a weird pickle as you alluded to because um they're undergoing significant transition as well. Like, Pete Carroll's out
You're
as
right.
head coach. They're bringing in a guy we like a lot at Mike McDonald. But you never know first year head coach, you never really know what to expect. So this is a team that's like a lot of teams you can classify, right? As like a rebuilding team or a contender. They're neither, it feels like. And so it will be interesting to see how they handle the offseason and everything. Looking at their needs, um, their their top one is interior offensive line.
Yeah, they're
They're
losing
losing
everybody.
literally every starter at interior offensive line. They're losing Damian Lewis, Evan Brown, and Phil Haynes, who are their starting guards and center. Um, and then on defense, their biggest need is linebacker, as they're potentially losing Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks. So this is the team that's definitely losing some big names that we didn't even mention. Leonard Williams, who they picked up in season last year from the Giants, and also Noah Fant at tight end. They're losing some pieces that they're going to have to replenish if they want to get back to where they were 2 years ago and make the playoffs.
You're right. You're right. I think that pretty nicely kind of captures where they're at. And if they do decide to take the route more so of, all right, let's just take a step back. We got a new coach. We trust him. Give him a year. Let's just start. Like, I wouldn't even call it a full rebuild. Maybe we coin it like a mini rebuild. They use that 16th overall pick in a way that I think might maximize it here. That past those top three quarterbacks, there's a lot of debate, which I'm sure we'll talk about, between Penix and McCarthy and Nix. Maybe they decide 16th overall, they have those deep Harbaugh connections with Mike McDonald as head coach. Maybe he's chatted with Jim, and they decide to take J.J. McCarthy with that 16th overall pick. And
yeah, that'd be crazy. And it's that's actually of our what ifs. Like that's like a fairly realistic one. I feel like yes, they have Geno Smith under contract, but I I don't think he'll be able to recapture his magical year from last year. And it's not a bad thing to sit a rookie quarterback. I feel like the NFL has kind of gone away from that. Last year we saw Richardson, Stroud, and Young all week 1 starters. I've always been a big proponent of sitting quarterbacks. Prime example, Mahomes. He sat his first year.
You're
never
right.
looked back since starting. And so if they do select McCarthy or another quarterback, it's not a bad idea to let him sit a year or two behind a guy like Geno Smith and then take the reins. Also another guy I'm thinking about, Jordan Love, right? Jordan Love didn't start for a couple of years, and he looks really good this year. So just because you have Geno Smith, that doesn't mean you can't take a quarterback in the first round.
Especially a guy who is going to need that development in McCarthy.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll go down to LA. We'll wrap it up here. And, what I'll just put out there is hopefully our viewers and listeners are going to find, hey, these guys are right, like a decent amount of time. Maybe not. I'm going to put our average in the 40% range. But what I can confidently say is that we will get some things wrong. And one thing that we both had wrong heading into this season was the Los Angeles Rams.
Yeah, we were low on them. I looked at their defense specifically, and I just didn't recognize a lot of names outside of Aaron Donald, and I thought that was going to be a major hole, and let the team down. I was wrong, and that was mainly because they got a lot of boost out of mid-round rookies in Byron Young at edge and Kobe Turner on the D line, and because they haven't had a first-round pick in what seems to be ages. And they finally have a first-round pick this year, Stevie.
Number 19, no less.
Yeah. So it will definitely that will be something new, right? Rams picking the first round. Where do they go? They can maybe get a high-impact player. But I think this team, they're well coached in Sean McVay. So I should have anticipated that they'll play above their pay grade just because of him. But I think once again, like the majority of their needs probably are on the defensive side of the ball again. They are losing both their potentially losing both their starting safeties and John Johnson and Jordan Fuller, and a starting corner in Ahkello Witherspoon. But their front seven with, like I mentioned, like Aaron Donald, Kobe Turner, Byron Young, like they have some pieces there. I think they could use another edge rusher, as could anyone. But I think this team could be have another solid year ahead of them. And then I need of course to mention that on offensive, they're one of their few needs is interior line. They have the weapons in Puka and Cooper and Kyron Williams, and Matthew Stafford is still a very, very good quarterback, but they need to make sure to protect him with beefing up that interior line.
For sure. Yeah, I think that covers it well on the Rams. And to close things out here with our what if, we just said, what if they manage to get the talent in the back of their defense where they do need some help? And we mentioned Winfield earlier being a free agent for the Bucs. Like we said, maybe they choose to prioritize their offensive free agents, have to let somebody walk. I think if we see Winfield go to LA, that is one hell of a defensive piece to put in place.
For sure. Transformer of the secondary.
Yeah. Awesome, Beach. Well, I think that is mostly going to cover us for this this episode, though. Any parting thoughts for our audience?
No, I mean, once again, this is only our second ever episode, so we're gonna iron it out. I think we went over our time goal again,
Just a little bit.
and
We like
as
to
we
talk.
try to get in our flow. So just bear with us. Bottom line is, we hope you enjoy our content. While it might be rough around the edges, we hope you enjoyed it and continue with us on this journey as we figure out what the future of this endeavor is. But we love football, we love sports, and we enjoy talking about it, and hope you get some entertainment and some value out of it. But yeah, Doghouse Sports, your backyard spot, for all things sports. Stick with us.
See you next time.